Todd Schrupp. Welcome to TVG's Legends. Tonight's guest is trainer Richard Mandella. The son of a blacksmith, Mandella opened a public stable in the mid-70s and soon enjoyed success. His biggest wins include a monumental upset of Cigar in the 1996 Pacific Classic and 4 victories on Breeders' Cup Day 2003. The Hall of Famer sat down with our Simon Bray to discuss all of that and more. Let's join them now.
Let's go back to the beginning, Richard, and how were you first introduced to horse racing?
My father had a small ranch in Beaumont, California, and he was a blacksmith, and we did a little bit of breaking and training and bred a few horses on that ranch and kind of did a little bit of everything.
And when did you realize you wanted to be a trainer rather than maybe a blacksmith like your father? What took you to that direction?
I watched my father sweat and work so hard as a blacksmith. It didn't take me long to realize I wanted to do something a little different. But I actually wanted to be a jockey till I was about 15 and grew out of that side of the business. And I gave it a little thought about being a veterinarian, but I started studying a little harder than usual in school, and my grades went down, not up. So it was a pretty good sign that I wasn't cut out for it, and I became a trainer because it's the only test that I could pass.
And that was in 1976. You opened your public stable.
74.
74. Outside of your father, who were the early influences on you in the early days?
I ended up going to work at Three Rings Ranch and breaking and getting the old horses ready to go back to the track there, and spent 1 year at Farrell Jones's ranch in the afternoon so that I could move to Santa Anita and go to the racetrack and still make enough money to have a family. So I would work in the morning for Lefty Nickerson and drive out to Farrell Jones in the afternoon and break yearlings.
I've heard you talk about Lefty Nickerson quite a bit. I believe he was at your Hall of Fame induction, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, and he was a big influence as well early on?
He was a very big influence, probably the biggest as far as actual training. He was the only other trainer I ever worked for as a steady job. Mostly I broke yearlings and kind of did my own thing. But Lefty was an amazingly smart man and had a way of making me understand what the picture was. I'm just very lucky to find somebody like that in my life to give me that help.
And then along came Phon Trick, and he had to be a major influence on your career because not only he was one of the fastest horses you've probably ever trained, but he produced a daughter in Phon Chatter that gave you your first Breeders' Cup win as well, correct?
Yes, he did. Phon Trick, I happen to own 20% of him also, made it extra special. But he was as fast as any horse I've ever seen, and turned out to be a pretty good sire. And as you say, he got me my first Breeders' Cup winner and champion 2-year-old filly.
And what was that feeling like training her?
That was pretty special.
Yeah.
Finish as they come to the line. Sardula and Phon Chatter stride for stride, and Phon Chatter prevails in a stiff drive to win it.
And then you had another Breeders' Cup winner, an Eclipse winner that same year, Kodashan. From an outsider looking on, it showed your diverse talents as a trainer.
Kodashan is the victor!
Any thoughts about Kodashan?
He was a great horse. It took a few races for me to kind of get to understand him and learn how to train him. But he was a little bit aggressive in his races early, and then once he settled, I think it was the 1.25 mile stake at Santa Anita early in the meet. He settled and he ran a good second. And right there, I just knew I had him, and from that day on, it was all nothing but gravy.
Let's go back to Phon Trick, Richard, a horse that had so much potential, but was never probably rewarded with an Eclipse Award. His career cut short with an injury after a good performance in the Tom Fool back east. That was the year of the inaugural Breeders' Cup, and probably a lot of emphasis as far as Eclipse voting placed on the Breeders' Cup, right, the first year?
Yes, there was. You know, the Breeders' Cup, you know, it's about being champions and all that. But Phon Trick broke his sesamoid about 3 or 4 weeks before the Breeders' Cup, preparing for it. And he pulled up lame out of the Tom Fool the last time I ran him at Belmont Park. Ran second to Groovy. And did everything we could. We x-rayed him, waited 3 or 4 weeks and re-x-rayed him. There was something up in that ankle, but it tightened down after a week after the Tom Fool to where we thought it was fine, and we couldn't find anything in x-ray, so I went ahead and started pointing him to the Breeders' Cup, and he broke his sesamoid. For him not to be voted champion sprinter that year was one of the sourest things in my life. He'd beaten everybody, was unbeatable.
They pass the 8th ball. Phon Trick on the outside leads by a full length. Then Smile is second by a half. Love That Mac on the outside, third, gaining ground. Love That Mac now takes second. Phon Trick has the lead. Love That Mac is second. It is Phon Trick in front.
And Smile came along and he won the Breeders' Cup, and it was a good horse. I'm not taking anything away from him, but because he'd won the Breeders' Cup and my horse had a broken sesamoid, I didn't win the Eclipse Award. And to this day, I don't think that's right. And I think the game needs to think about that and give the best horses their due.
1990 in the Beverly Hills, you saddled two fillies, Beautiful Medley and Reluctant Guest. You became the first Southern California trainer to dead heat in the Grade 1. How was that feeling?
It was a great feeling. Those two mares were very good. Reluctant Guest had been around and been established as a good mare. The other mare had broken her maiden just the Santa Anita meet before that and just stepped right up into the big leagues. But I think it was the Wilshire handicap at Hollywood that they ran first and second in about a length and a half apart and came back in that race and dead heated. And I remember I was standing upstairs with Robert Folsom, who owned Reluctant Guest, and he asked me who I thought won, and I said, I can't tell. I said, are you going to go down to the winner's circle with me? He says, I think I better wait up here. And I said back to him, I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and go because it really doesn't matter to me.
And that led into, I mean, that gave you a good experience for the years that you had Gentleman, Sandpit, and Siphon.
Gentlemen going on to win the Hollywood Gold Cup. Siphon was second, and Sandpit third, 159-1.
How hard is it to manage three top-class horses like that and keep the connections happy when they're competing against each other all the time?
Well, you know, I've been fortunate enough in a lot of my years training to get to train for people that I enjoy being around. And I had great owners of those horses that never once made me feel uncomfortable doing what I was doing. They all wanted their shot at the Santa Anita Handicap and the Hollywood Gold Cup and Pacific Classic. So I thought, if they want it, let's go for it, and the best will survive. And it turned out exciting, a lot of fun.
Siphon holding him off, and Siphon will win the Hollywood Gold Cup.
A lot of hype around the inaugural Dubai World Cup, similar to the Breeders' Cup, the inaugural running. Probably one of the most thrilling stretch duels in racing we've seen in the last 20 years because of all the publicity that the race got. Talk us through that stretch run that Sol Lamata put in against Cigar when he actually made the lead, I believe.
That first trip to Dubai was one of the greatest times of my life. Had to look it up on the map to see where Dubai was. I didn't know where it was. I told you I didn't listen in school. And we got there, and it was such a different world from what we have. We got there, and the horses had a little hard time that first year. Billy and I both looked at each other like, are we crazy to be here shipping this far? But after a few days, they settled in, and amazing. They all came right back to life, just like they'd been before they left home. And as you say, when they ran the race, we had taken Soul of the Matter back on, you know, by design, and he came through the field, got through every step of the way, and came to the 8th pole, and he put his nose in front of Cigar, and I thought, boy, I've got him now. And Cigar looked over at him and just grounded out and wouldn't let him win. Simple as that.
It's a duel to the line. The Soul of the Matter on the outside of Cigar, but Cigar is digging deep. He's never had to fight harder. He's coming back. It's going to be Cigar. It's going to take it up the line. Cigar by 3 parts of it. 14 out of 14 for Cigar.
Let's move on to 1996 now. The Pacific Classic right here at Del Mar, probably one of the biggest and upsets. Stunned silence here that day. I was actually here that day, of course. Let's go back prior to the race. What were your expectations with Dare and Go leading into that race with Cigar?
You know, I had Dare and Go and Siphon going into that race, and the two of them couldn't have been any better than they were. Both training up a storm. Siphon had just won the Hollywood Gold Cup at Hollywood Park. Dare and Go was on top of his game, just never trained better. And I thought I had a good chance to be second and third. You know, I was as big a fan of Cigar as anybody, but I was leading two good horses over there, and that's always dangerous.
Dare and Go's going to look for the upset, and Dare and Go has gone right on by Cigar. Dare and Go and Alex Solis win the Pacific Classic.
Going into it, did you think one had a better chance than not, or you just thought they were both training that well that they equally could be competitive?
I didn't know which one I'd like better because both horses were very good on their day. But you know, your old boss Billy Mott had brought out Jerry to the Hollywood Gold Cup, and they let Siphon get away on an easy kind of lead, and you couldn't do that. If you did that, he'd be gone and you'd never catch him.
Off and running in the Hollywood Gold Cup. Rocket start for Siphon, sent straight out to clear off early.
I know that's what was in Billy's mind as to why they sent Cigar after him. They were afraid if he got away, they'd never catch him, and they didn't really think the rest of them were that good.
Cigar began beautifully. He's in the blue cap, one from the outside, but as expected, Siphon is going to sprint up the leader.
Darren Go had been a front runner himself and up close on the pace, and the morning of the draw breakfast here at Del Mar, somebody asked me, what are you going to do with your two speed horses? And I said right there, I said, I'm going to take Darren Go back because nobody should go with Siphon. But Billy wasn't at the breakfast. So he should have showed up at the breakfast.
Yeah, he always misses those breakfasts. I seem to remember you had an influx of South American horses, Gentleman, Siphon, Sandpit, Porto Madero. How did those come to be in your barn? I mean, it seemed that they all came at once in a span of like 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know why. Sandpit, Romarin was one of the first from Brazil. And then Sandpit came after him, and Sandpit was the first Grade 1 winner from Brazil to win a Grade 1 in North America. The first real good horse from Argentina was Ledger Cat years ago. He won the Citation. I think he won $988,000. I wanted to give $2,000 of mine up to make him a millionaire, but nobody let me do that. But I went on a trip to South America for Mr. Hubbard and bought him. It was a great horse, ran till he was about 8 or 9 years old too.
Ledger Cat, Lutherange on tour, squeezing through at the rail. They hit the wire. Ledger Cat won it.
Anything about your training style that you think suits those particular types of horses? You've obviously got a key to them.
I do have a rounded out experience in horses, breaking a lot of yearlings, having galloped a lot myself. And when you train the South Americans, you have to re-educate them. It's a big part of it. You've got to let them down, let them rest, and then bring them back little by little to train under our circumstances, which is galloping with saddles on their back every day instead of bareback, and getting them used to the routine here.
The list goes on and on as far as monumental and significant wins. Talk about putting Lafitte Pinkeye up on Irish Nip for winner number 8,834. Talk about being part of history on that day.
Pinkeye gets a whiff of immortality as Irish Nip surging clear in its history at Hollywood Park.
That was really fun. It was really special for me. Lafitte's always been one of my favorites, one of the people I looked up to in the industry growing up. And, you know, everybody in the world wanted to have him on their horse to break that record. And it just, when it happened, it was pretty special.
2001, you were inducted into the Hall of Fame. First, let me ask you, is that something that a trainer thinks about? I mean, early on in their career, probably not. You're looking to get state winners and get on the map. But at a certain juncture in your career, once the accolades have mounted up, are you thinking about the Hall of Fame and trying to get into it?
When I started training horses, I just wanted to see a nice row of white webbings with an M on them with some nice horses behind them. That was my big dream. I didn't have dreams of having a million horses or Hall of Fame or anything like that. In fact, I used to kid. I've always kept my training charts, and I've always kidded, don't lose those charts. They might want them in the Hall of Fame someday. It was a joke, and I never meant it. But it was one of the finest days of my life, and when I was inducted, and there's nothing ever going to kind of replace that feeling that day.
And then 2003, you added to your achievements with one of the best Breeders' Cup days in history for a trainer, I think. Thoughts about that day going into it? You thought you had 4 live horses?
I thought all my horses were doing well. You know, whether they were going to win or not, I don't usually stop and beat it down to that point. Sure. I just, as you know, you've trained, and you know, you just try to get them up to their best. Mm-hmm. The significant part of it is I'd cut my barn down to 40 horses the year before. So I didn't have the 70 that I used to have all the time. I just was down to that one barn of 40. And we ran 8 horses, 20% of them on that day.
You knocked off the juvenile with action this day, the juvenile fillies with half bridle. It even got better with a 20-minute photo with Joe Hawk. Now you're sitting there 3 for 3 with Pleasantly Perfect, getting ready to go in the Classic. Talk about what's going through your mind at that point. I mean, do you think I've just blown everything? I've won my 3 and it's not going to happen? Or did you really think at that stage at 4 o'clock in the afternoon that you could take down the Classic as well?
Well, honestly, it all was happening so fast, I didn't have time to think of that much. That long photo of Johar dead heating took so long that I had to run back to the paddock to saddle Pleasantly Perfect just in time to get him saddled for the next race. And I think it might have went through my mind once or twice, is there any way you could win 4? Because I really had confidence in him by that time. I thought he really was coming up to the race well, and he had established himself as being that good in my mind.
Pleasantly Perfect rolls up on the outside from 4th. Then it's Dynamo running in 5th. Perfect drifts 6 toward the inside. Condoray, Medallion, Girl in a pitched battle here in the Classic. Heads up punt for the lead, and Pleasantly Perfect trying to mow them down with 100 yards to go. Then Dynamo on the outside, and they're coming down to the finish, and it is Pleasantly Perfect. Man, oh Mandella, what a day! Pleasantly Perfect wins by 2.
You'd won 4 on a Breeders' Cup day before, not 4 Breeders' Cup races, but you'd won 4 races also at Santa Anita, right?
Yeah, in 1993 we had 4 horses on the day. We had Phone Chatter in the 2-year-old filly race, and Kodashan in the 1.5-mile turf, and Region in the Skywalker handicap, I think it was, later in the card, and the Smile Stake Memo won that day, and they all 4 won. I thought that's the craziest thing I ever thought of or heard of, and surely would never happen again.
Of course, Soul of the Matter and Cigar hooked up in the inaugural running of the World Cup. Then you came back several years later with Pleasantly Perfect, and that had to be a great feeling as well for a horse that, if I'm correct, correct me if I'm wrong, had some physical problems along the way early on, and then all of a sudden, like a flower, he just blossomed and ran off all those victories, Breeders' Cups Classic and Dubai World Cup.
That was one of the most special feelings. Of course, it was the richest race in the world. It's supposed to be pretty special, but that horse, having had a virus that settled in his heart area and inflamed the heart sac and the heart itself, and it took him 1.5 years to get over it.
Richard Mandella has been waiting 8 years for his first Dubai World Cup, and he's got it finally, as his Pleasantly Perfect comes home in one of the most memorable finishes we'll ever see here at Nat El Sheba.
For him to come back and be any good, I thought was successful. But then for him to just get better and better, as you saw he did, to win the Breeders' Cup Classic and then go to Dubai and win that, it was unbelievable. I just couldn't admire him enough. I loved him like a son. I mean, for him to achieve that level after what was wrong with him as a 2-year-old, it was quite an accomplishment on his part.
You're very patient and good with older horses. The Tin Man, another example.
The Tin Man has a short lead. It's the Tin Man in front. Bay Crux, Will-O-Wisp battles at the rail. The Tin Man, the old man, the Tin Man wins!
I got to be honest with you, a lot of trainers probably would have given up on that horse. He had bowed tendons, right?
Strange enough, for 30 years I've had pretty good luck with my horses that start to bow, stop, and come back, and they heal up pretty good.
Yeah, I remember I was stabled next to you for a couple of years with the Paulson horse, and I was talking to you one morning, and Gary was there, and you mentioned about your success with bow tendons, and I was listening and eagerly listening, and the success you've had with a lot of those has just been incredible.
The biggest secret of it is don't bow them too bad. The more severe the tear in the tendon, the less chance you'll ever bring it back. So you have to spot them early and diagnose them properly and give them time. I've always done the tendon split. I don't know that that's the difference, but it's always worked. The luck I've had, I'm not changing anything. We stick with it.
How about the most satisfying win?
I'm fortunate enough to have lots to choose from, but Pleasantly Perfect. You know, the Breeders' Cup or the Dubai Cup, either one of them. What he went through, as I went on a minute ago, it doesn't get any better than that.
So he'd be the most satisfying horse to train and probably a favorite to train, correct? Same label?
Yeah. Bad and Big was my favorite. I might not be here if he hadn't done so well as a young horse in 1976 until he was 8 years old. I won the Del Mar Oaks, matter of fact, with a mare named Desert, a sister to Johar.
Coming for home, and it's still Desert finding more. Desert, Solar Echo. Desert holding on. Desert takes the Del Mar Oaks.
She came here and you needed a net to catch her. And I got her to the races. Took a lot of I used to handle her on the pony myself, and we had to do a lot of work with her. She'd just try to get loose all the time, and had run twice in Europe, and the trainer had sent her back home and told him, breed this mare, don't try to train her, she's just crazy, you know. Right. So we worked with her, and she broke her maiden, won her allowance race and that, and won the Del Mar Oaks. And that day in the Oaks, I was pretty satisfied.
Let's talk about the Tin Man, Richard. I mean, we've talked about the injuries that he suffered, the boat tendons. That's an accomplishment in itself, that he can come back to the races and compete at any sort of level, I think. What about the ride you've had from allowance condition to multiple Grade 1 winner?
Yeah, it's been a great ride. He's been such a pet around the barn for years. When he did bow as a 2-year-old, I castrated him also. And I did that on the old theory that when you gild a horse, they grow up with a leaner neck and shoulder carriage, which has to relieve 50, 60 pounds off the front legs. Mm-hmm. And that was the reason going in, was he's going to be lucky to make it back with the tendons injured to begin with. Let's take the weight off of him and then have him behave himself being a gelding. And I think those two things are something that young trainers need to hear, that does help you get horses back. And there's not enough good old geldings in this world anymore.
The Tin Man, it's his million. The Tin Man has won it.
Your son, Gary, former assistant to you. Last several years, he came this side of the business, what I'm doing for a while, took a step out of training and then went back to training. How proud of you of the accomplishments that he's had in a fairly short period of time, really?
Couldn't be more proud. The reason he even tried TVG was because I told him to give it a try, and that if he ever wanted his job back, he could come back and I'd give him more money. And you can bet he remembered that when he came back. He demanded more money. But he didn't really have a burning desire to do it. I couldn't believe that. I thought, you guys, you don't do any real work. You just sit there and talk a little bit. I thought, why would a guy pass that up? Instead of the pain that I suffer every day, being defeated and horses having problems. But I guess he needed that pain.
Any burning desires to get to the Kentucky Derby?
The Derby is a burning desire in every horse trainer, every horse owner, every jockey, fan. There's nothing like the Kentucky Derby. But at this stage, I don't think I'd trade some of my days I've had for that success. Sure. But if there's anything in the world I'd like to do from here to the rest of my future, it would be to win the Kentucky Derby.
I just want to thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been an inspiration to me on the West Coast. I was based out on the East Coast, and looking up to you, I think you've always been an inspiration to me, and we hope to see you competing here for a long, long time.
Thanks a lot.
Despite the demands of being one of the top trainers in the country, Richard Mandella has always made time to participate in all areas of the racing industry. Name an organization in California and he's involved in it. Name a charitable organization and he's given his time to it when it comes to horse racing. Dick Mandella may be a hard worker, but there's also something to be said for good karma. I'm Todd Schrupp. Thank you for joining us on Legends.
A 16th of a mile to go, and you can never